Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of the Reason Roundtable where we answer even more of your questions. This is not a full-size roundtable. It's just a table for two. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my illustrious colleague, Fiona Harrigan. Fiona, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so today's question comes from Lloyd, and it is about immigration, which Fiona writes about for us at Reason. And Lloyd writes, "This is probably more of a psychological question, but where does strong to violent anti-immigration sentiment come from? I mean, what positive value does it accomplish for those who feel that way? Certainly many people feel a threat to their group identity, their own culture, their religion, language, and so forth. But why? Why feel such a threat? Is it simply discomfort with the unfamiliar, the non-standard, the different, a fear of competition, scarcity of resources? Why do you think so many people are so uncomfortable with diversity, change, and newness?" Fiona, this is something you write about a lot, both the policy aspects of immigration, but also the kind of the social cultural aspects of immigration. So what do you think here?
I do think that competition over limited resources or the perception of limited resources is a big part of it. When people are surveyed about their opposition to immigration, very often they go to an economic place and they worry about social services being outstretched, government resources being overstretched, all those sorts of things. But I think psychologically, to get to that part of the question, many people also report feeling threatened because of a lack of control that they perceive. Or a lack of choice about immigration. I think they feel that a lot of these things are happening without their consent or their input. And that kind of perception only grows when the dominant public image of immigration is as an image of border chaos. That kind of thing only gets worse. But also related to that, I think, is this image and this development of immigration as a catch-all for a lot of other anxieties. You see politicians painting it in these terms, and certainly citizens and voters feel this way too, where immigration has kind of come to encapsulate concerns about crime in cities, about social ties changing and lack of social cohesion, about housing shortages, unemployment rates, even things like voting trends and census redistricting. But I think even more broadly than that, a question that I always come back to is why these messages are so pervasive. And that has a lot to do with the incentives that politicians and public figures are considering when they put out more anti-immigration messaging. There are surveys and studies that indicate that anti-immigration voters value immigration as an issue higher than pro-immigration voters do. And that has a lot to do with which messages are popular and which are liabilities for public figures and politicians, and in turn, which policies end up getting pushed and enacted eventually. And that all kind of creates a self-perpetuating cycle.
So I want to go back to something you said about how people go to econ responses, but also because they don't feel like they have a choice. And so I think that's right in some ways, but also there are so many things that people don't have a choice about. I mean, you don't necessarily have a choice about who moves into your neighborhood, even in a world where, say, there is absolutely no immigration at all. If the border is completely closed, there's no immigrants coming in. I mean, you don't have a choice necessarily about what buildings get built, about what stores get opened, about how your neighborhood or your town or the economy in it works. And so why the focus then on immigration?
I think it really does come back to this aspect of immigration becoming a catch-all. Kind of every state is a border state is a phrase that you hear coming up again and again, especially in the last presidential cycle. I think a lot of people have grown to feel like it is a close-to-home issue because of the way that immigration is painted. Right, that it is affecting crime in your city or the jobs that you can or can't get or the housing that you can or can't get. I think just that messaging and that perception is really, really powerful to people. And I think that plays a big role in why people feel like it is a close to home issue, even if they live in Kansas and not Arizona.
What about this other thing you mentioned, the discrepancy between voters who really prioritize being anti-immigration, who really want restrictions on immigration, and the people who like immigration, who think it's good? You said that the folks who are on the immigration restrictionist side tend to feel that way more strongly, and so therefore there's sort of a, even if forget the kind of raw numbers, the intensity is on the side of immigration restriction. Why is that? Why is there not intensity on the pro-immigration side?
Well, I do think it is kind of a self-perpetuating cycle where these messages get some buy-in during some times of border chaos being an acute example in recent years, which pushes for more restriction, and then those restrictive policies don't end up solving the problem. So it kind of becomes this never-ending cycle of crackdown after crackdown. And also, I think it being such a popular thing now to be restrictionist, especially in the last presidential cycle, but over the past couple years too, and not just limited to presidential candidates, you see people trying to kind of out-hawk each other. Not that Democrats have been super stalwart defenders of immigration in recent years, but I struggle to think of a prominent politician who has offered a really strong, convincing, full-throated defense of immigration, let alone in the presidential race, but even congressionally. And I think that's a big reason why these crackdown options are the only options that people really see as options, right?
Even the pro-immigration folks, the sort of the center-left kind of wonky abundance people who will say, look, we think immigration is basically good, especially high-skilled immigration. They are talking amongst themselves right now about how to give immigration-skeptical voters something they want, how to kind of give in to them, because there is this perception right now that that voters simply are not going to go for they're simply not going to go for a sort of more open immigration regime. They want restrictionism. At the same time, if you go back to how you talked about how voters are concerned about economics, is that right? Because it sort of seems to me, as we have seen the border kind of shut down over the past year or so, first starting under Joe Biden and then even more so under President Trump, what we have seen is that there are economic consequences, and they're not good. The economy is struggling because of a lack of workers.
Yeah, absolutely. And people, I think, overlook the fact that crackdowns are very, very expensive, both in terms of the dollars and the manpower, but also in rights violations, civil liberties violations, all of those sorts of aspects as well. But, I think I and a lot of people in the immigration space would argue that reforming pathways to encourage lawful migration and migration that Americans would perceive as beneficial can do a lot to kind of reduce these growing pains and to alleviate some of these economic concerns. It's just such a big barrier to get over, where a lot of people say, I'm not going to support immigration until the border's fixed. Those kind of preconditions, but it's easy to overlook how those things are much more connected, and reform can be really beneficial in solving these big issues that people point to before they can consider reform.
So what about the crime aspect of this? You mentioned that when people are asked about why they fear immigration, they will cite crime. But most of the evidence suggests that immigrants, lawful immigrants, are actually less prone to criminality than native-born Americans, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And even a more recent example, the blue cities that received a lot of migrants through Republican governors' busing schemes, Greg Abbott being a prime example, those cities saw no difference in their crime rates, or their crime rates went down. I believe that was about 2 years ago that those studies kind of came out. But, thinking about these sudden influxes of immigrants in blue cities, that should have indicated something of criminality if there was going to be criminality, but it wasn't borne out in the crime data.
So I also want to ask you about, to go back to Lloyd's question here about the psychology of this. And sort of he just seems kind of stumped. Why are people like this? And I wonder what you think about the kind of historical, almost evolutionary reasons. For most of human history, people didn't travel very far from where they were born. Society was organized around kin networks, right? Like this whole thing of widespread travel and mass immigration is a relatively new phenomenon in human history. I'm not saying that no country has ever been a kind of, had a lot of immigration before, but this is not the norm for basically most of human history at all. And I just wonder if you sort of think there is this kind of, I don't know, almost evolutionary newness where people just haven't gotten used to it yet.
I think about the historical context in the U.S. a lot when I think about why immigration backlash is as strong as it is. And I don't know that this answers your question specifically, but I think we've kind of been a victim of our own success, and we have and of our short memory in how we turn people into Americans in this country and how we incorporate them and assimilate them over the generations. Compared to other countries, we see a lot more migration, and we have seen a lot more migration and open migration over the course of our history. And we do have this longstanding tradition of making people into Americans. So when I hear these arguments about criminality, about lack of social cohesion, about unemployment, and all of these kind of nasty stereotypes of immigrants, it's the same arguments that people made about the Irish, about the Eastern Europeans, about the Chinese over the years. And we forget those difficulties, those growing pains so quickly. So I think that's kind of a different approach to your question, but I do think that short memory is a big reason why we come to this place of not supporting immigration, even though it's been so core to our history.
So I just wanted to react as we close out here to a suggestion from Lloyd from his letter that I didn't read, where he says he thinks it must come mainly from religion or cultural chauvinism. Do you think that's right? And then answer that, but then also, what do you think can be done to combat this instinctive sense that immigrants don't belong here, that this is wrong in some way, the kind of psychological sense that Lloyd is writing about?
Yeah, I think people come at this issue from all sorts of places, and certainly some people might come at it from a place of cultural or religious chauvinism. But, I think in addressing these psychological concerns, it's kind of a two-pronged solution, and neither of them is all that easy. I think congressional action and government reform for those pathways and encouraging lawful migration is really key. And I think also there are certain aspects of the immigration system that only exacerbate these tensions psychologically. The perception that there's not fairness, that this is a less fair process than it might have been before, that people are overly dependent on the system. And there are a lot of solutions to those issues. I think private sponsorship is a big one, putting the onus more on individuals to support refugees and migrants. But also then just keeping in mind the fact that this isn't new, the process or the concerns. Immigration has been happening over the years in much the same way. And the government has kind of exacerbated these ideas of illegality and legality with making it so difficult to come here legally. So those arguments kind of have fertile ground to fester. And I think it's really a two-pronged way where the psychological and the kind of bureaucratic reform have to go hand in hand. And it's hard to say which one's harder, but I think they're both necessary.
The psychological and bureaucratic reforms have to go hand in hand. All right. That's a good note to end on, I think. Thank you all for watching Table for Two. For more bonus segments like this one, subscribe to our YouTube channel and check back regularly. If you'd like us to answer your question, send your short, succinct, pithy, and not very long question to podcasts@reason.com. That is podcasts@reason.com. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon.